All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. My hair's all messed up, but welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. Pasta Jardula here. Hopefully, you guys can hear me good. I am on the ones and twos. Can you hear me good there? Let me know. We got Arem hanging out on the Rockfin. Guys, do us a favor. Share the Rockfin stream if you can. If you have a few extra bucks left in the tank for $14.99 a month, you can get our Rockfin subscription. That does help us out. And you get everybody else's content across the board for that same one low price. We are still waiting, and I will bring back the Dancing Dolphins, Fred Edward. We are still waiting for the Rockfin status of being able to set an individual amount for our channel to take place. Hopefully that will happen soon. I don't see anybody over on the Rumble. If you guys can do us a favor. Why isn't that coming up? Are we on Rumble? Just put hello. Hello, hello. It's in the chat. Where's Vicky Lynn? Where's Fred Edwards? Get on over to the Rumble. There's 33 people watching. We've been growing that channel. I'm going to share it now. We want you to do us a favor. Help the Convo Couch out. Share this information. Guys, we don't participate in team sports. We hang out in the middle. You know that. You know the truth. We try to bring the conversations we have. It's not really financially advantageous of sorts. It's really not they don't give you a lot of money for doing so if you decide not to play team sports. When you play team sports, that's when you get the people in there, and that's when you get the people following you, and you build these large crowds, and then you're boosted by the algorithm. If you play team sports on the right, you're boosted in the algorithm of Rumble. If you play team sports on the left, you're boosted in the algorithm in YouTube. So we don't play team sports, so the only way we get boosted is when you share us out. So hopefully I sound good. Do I sound good? I know I look good. My hair's a little bit messed up, but I feel good. How do I sound? Oh, Alvin Johnson jumping on in. Thank you so much. How do I sound, Arem? Deborah Wilson, we love you. Guys, guess what we're going to talk about today? You'll never guess. Not even by reading the thumbnail. You got it. The bank collapse. SVB went down. Well, the questions are, why did it go down? How did it go down? And what's going to happen in the future? So I've been catching up. My good friend Clint Russell, he's been doing some of his own shows. He did a show with Dave Smith yesterday as well. Go ahead and check him out. Liberty Lockdown. He's a finance guy, and he was able to give some clear answers on why this happened and what's going on, because I think there's a lot of questions out there. And with Joe Biden coming out this morning trying to say yada, 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 what is what, I think, to me, he's signaling what is really, really going on. But for you guys, for the Convo Couch audience, what we did is we went into the chamber of sorts and brought out a finance guy, a guy who teaches finance. He's a smart guy. He does it well. He does it a lot. His name is Zach Moore. He's joining us today to help us out with all this mess that's going on inside the whole bank system. How you doing today, Zach?
Great. Good morning. Happy Ides of March.
Good morning. For who? Oh, that's right. The majority of our audience is probably still in California, still in Vegas or whatever. Good morning to them. It's 11:30 over there, but it's 2:30 over here.
Great to be here.
Glad to have you. Guys, Fiorella should be along soon. She will jump in as soon as she gets back. So please hang on in there. Do us a favor. Share it. Let's go. Let's get it out there. Okay, so oh, wow.
Well, can I start off by saying that I used to hate finance, and I think most Americans are also despise this language and a lot of these things, in addition to kind of what happens. So we've been taught that we can't learn this, that there's jargon, that it's sophisticated, that there's mustardy numbers moving everywhere, and it's simply not true. And everyone can understand what's going on here.
Well, here's the thing I have to say about the whole thing, right? At the end of the day, we can try to understand the crux of what's going on. But to me personally, it's a big Ponzi scheme. Our whole system, right? It's a big Ponzi scheme. And, it's only a matter of time for this stuff to happen. There's only a matter of time before the dollar starts to tank. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they used to be the good old days, I guess. Not the good old days, but we can go into another country, steal their resources, put them on the dollar. But we're running out of countries to invade. We're running out of allies that are on our side. all the big oppositions have aligned together through BRICS, whether it be Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And now Saudi Arabia is talking about joining this whole mess, which we reported on the Combo Couch a year ago that Iran and Saudi Arabia are starting to open up the books to have talks. And that's, I think, what was behind the Soleimani hit, right? A lot of people have talked about that. They wanted to make sure that they couldn't come together, that there was no way they can come together, but that seemed to fail. But at the end of the day, is it fair to say, Zach, that our financial system, the dollar's not backed by anything? It's not like, Russia's currency, which is backed by oil and commodities. Is it fair to say something more than a big giant Ponzi scheme? And we're going to go over the crux of one part of the Ponzi scheme, but at the end of the day, it's going to fall like a house of cards.
Well, I hope everything doesn't collapse, because that means a lot of people get hurt. But it is true, our system is not designed to benefit our democratic country, the majority of the people. And so when the 1% became popular, that framing, which used to be something that we used to teach with United for a Fair Economy, about capitalism and the anti-corporate movement in the 2000s, early 2000s, when that went mainstream in 2011 with Occupy Wall Street, people got it right. That not only is the electoral system rigged, but also the financial system is absolutely rigged. And we'll get into that. You hinted something very important, that there is a massive change globally that should be looked into quite a bit, and you should keep reinforcing this, that part of our standard of living is because international debts and international commodity trades are, including oil, are exchanged in the dollar. So that backstops, people have to hold dollars. And part of that is our military. Part of that is the role the United States plays in creating international treaties. Part of it, if I dare I say, is some of the disastrous and terrible things that covert actions have done to undermine other people making their own decisions. Libya, Iraq come to mind. Leaders that would dare to put their currencies and back it by gold, which Russia is doing. Russia has both crude oil and gold reserves, and China has also been hoarding a lot of commodities in a sense to back their currency. So that change in the shift towards China and India and Russia, and the shift to Asia has been coming for a long time and talked about, but the currency shift it will be generationally significant. So you're right to point that out. I don't know if the dollar collapses, but if it collapsed, that means that you would, several things. I think a lot of people want the dollar to be cheaper because we're exporting inflation. I don't want to get into all, too much of the international monetary stuff, but other countries have to pay their debts in dollars. So part of what you brought up
now, the BRICS nations are moving towards their own currency. They're moving towards everything, their own banking system, their own SWIFT. They're, you know what I'm saying? And you're right. This is something to pay attention to. And this is too, when people say, well, you don't go too hard on Russia and China because you're a hardcore lefty and that's what you do. And I'm like, no, it's like at the end of the day, I look at what we do when we come in, when we want to regime change these countries. Number one, we want to extract their resources. But two, we want to thrust our monetary system on these countries. We want to make sure the dollar is prevalent in their countries. It's dominant in their countries. So we force the monetary system on them. But the thing about it is that our dollar is backed up by a gun and a tank. Other countries like China and Russia are backing their dollar in, gold and commodities. I mean, just that alone makes me say, so when I hear all these guys like banning China this, China that, I'm like, hey, dude, look at your own fucking country, right? Like, they're the ones who are just printing money printing, go, brrr, and I don't know what you have to say about that. I don't want to piss off any MMT people. I probably piss them off all the time.
Let's go for it.
when you print money, when you print excessive amount of money, doesn't that lead to inflation?
Right. Well, I saw the perfect meme the other day that said, if you can just print as much money, why am I paying taxes? If you can print infinite amounts of money, why am I paying taxes? But the more debt you have, the more taxes you have. So, almost half of our GDP, of what we produce, what people's hard work makes, is spent on the government. And most of that is the military, and military spending and wars cause inflation. Duh. And just look at the military budget and look at taxes, and you'll see they go the same way. Plus a lot of that fraud that's, some of it's being stolen. Who knows? They can't audit the military. No one knows how much money is being spent there. Um, so,
Yeah. They
yeah.
can never audit the military. Once, if they're gonna try to audit the military, you're gonna have planes fly into a building again. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's
So
kind of what I think. What I am making an official call to journalists out there who have good chops in the financial market, the Matt Tiabis, who, by the way, in 2008, 2009, 2010, wrote excellent articles if you want to understand the great sucking sound that Ross Perot used to say, or the vampire squid of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. He wrote several articles about how this thing works and how it's always worked and how they have engineered crashes. And here we are again. So I'm calling to them to say the headline needs to be, and this was reported by Bloomberg, so I
yeah,
expect this to probably get very hushed and go away. But Zero Hedge reported a Bloomberg source that said that JP Morgan officers were encouraging people who had their accounts in these are venture capitalist tech firms to pull their money out of the Silicon Valley Bank. And they lost a quarter of their reserves of their deposits. Now you do that to any bank and it's big time a problem. You do
yeah,
that to these people in the middle of when they're trying to raise some cash because things have gotten a little tight. They're not favorable banking conditions. People are pulling back. We can get onto all that. I want to know who goes to jail at JP Morgan as a bank officer encouraging another bank to fail. I want to know who's
yeah.
that is the story and should be the headline right now. So you want to talk about rigging? They're trying to rig another quantitative easing, and here they go. And they don't care if they use your tax dollars through the Treasury or the Federal Reserve to backstopping deposits is one thing, but to make sure that there aren't any losses. I
Yeah.
find that
Well,
people who
the answer
stocks
is
lost everything, but
nobody's going to go to jail until we get the pitchforks out, and that's the crazy thing. You did mention Matt Taibbi, who's been in the news lately. I'm not a huge Matt Taibbi fan. I don't have any beef against him, but I was kind of curious about the way he wrote a lot of articles, but refused to look into 9/11 to see, could it have been a little bit more than just a couple guys, a couple jihads getting a little pissed off because it backed up a lot of the work that's what they want to happen. You never let a good catastrophe go to waste, and
especially as a
that's
journalist,
that's why. Well, that's why I had to look at what COVID coming along. I looked at it differently. I was like, okay, manufactured, happened naturally. Every single time, there's one of these things that happen, we do know they're going to take advantage of it, right? They're going to take advantage of a crisis, but sometimes it seems like they need a crisis because the walls are actually closing in on all of them. You know what I'm saying? Because people are starting to find out their game.
Not Matt Damon. Jamie Dimon, the CEO, has been in the news recently about Mr. Epstein and dirty deeds done dirt cheap.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm gonna age myself a little bit. I was picturing like the Gremlins from the 1980s movie, and what was it when you put water on it, either they reproduce, but there was a bad one called Stripe and
Yep.
just had this huge grin, and that's kind of what I pictured, like ha ha ha, high voltage, bank runs, and that's give me a break. I mean, that's what they did. They're engineering this, and now they're gonna now there is the Fed can pivot now perhaps and change their behavior, and they start pumping the fluid again into the system. But you're right. Biden goes on TV. Everything's fine. Don't
Yeah.
worry. Here, can I read to you a quote? And this is, I hope people
Please
will
do.
understand this. This was on Bloomberg today about an hour ago, the former FDIC chair, and I believe under Carter. And if you remember, anyone who lived through the 80s and the 70s, we had very high inflation, high energy costs, disruptions from oil in the Middle East, and but we had inflation from the Vietnam War. Okay, so let's not play around like it was just Iran. It was everything got gummed up and shut down, and it was very hard to buy a house, and people lost their jobs. It was a mess in the late 70s, off and on throughout the 70s and into the 80s. So this was the FDIC chair back then, William Isaac, and this is what he said today. Quote, "There's no doubt in my mind there's going to be more." He's talking about shutting down banks and bank failures. How many more? I don't know. There's a former FDIC official saying there's going to be more. It's just the beginning. That should chill some chills down your arm, right?
There's so many eerie things too as well. I'm going to pull up when I get a chance. I wanted to start off the show. Hold on. Let me before I get this up here. So let's start. Let's just jump right into it. We've already laid it out right now. So the first question is, what happened? Was it negligence, or does it have something to do with the Fed hiking interest rates from less than 1% to 5%? But we've also talked about this, and I think a lot of people have to understand run on banks, meaning that people get spooked because we'll probably end up we'll end this section explaining the fact that emotion has a lot to do with the way the market kind of moves. It depends on if people have confidence or lack of confidence, what the hot thing is out there, what's catching on fire, where investments can go. But the people's emotions have a lot to do with what goes on in the market. I remember when my stepfather was alive and the market was crashing at one point, and he was getting so nervous because the TV was scaring the shit out of him that my mom had to take the remote control and hide it from him because he was constantly watching TV and getting scared. And that's when his money investor was like, listen, shut him up. Things are dropping. I'm going to make some buys, and I'm going to buy while it's low because you guys have liquidity, so let's go. But you can obviously see the fact, and this says right here, record bank run, meaning that people are starting to run and withdraw their money from the banks. Drained in a quarter, or 42 billion of SVB's deposits in hours, leaving it with negative $1 billion in cash. So in other words, people they started rushing to the bank, they started pulling out their money. So explain to us what happened, why they pulled out their money. And when you're done with this answering this question, we'll play Joe Biden's remarks from this morning. But was it negligence from the bank, or does it have something to do more with the Fed hiking these interest rates from 1% up to 5%? Go ahead, buddy.
Both. One is that there's tighter financial conditions because there are going to be others, like the former FDIC chair said. There's tighter financial conditions. It's harder to get a loan. Main Street understands this, is already feeling this. It's harder to get a mortgage. The bank is going to say you need a higher credit score, more cash. Auto loans are defaulting. People, when they got money during COVID, went and bought things that maybe they can't sustain. Credit cards are going up. So all this background tells you that all the other banks are also at risk, that normal people are feeling the pressure. Also, banks, like you say, we were talking yield curves, so differences in rates. Normally banks buy low, sell high. Okay. And they make 1% or 0.75%, and they got to pay you your savings dividend. But now it's flipped. So it's backwards, right? And every time that happens, we get a recession. Always. And 6 months, 18 months, but we get a recession. And we're going into recession. We're going to see unemployment go up. Silicon Valley has been firing for 6 months. Okay. And this bank, Silicon Valley Bank, is not normal people. This is not your mom and pop savings and loan or credit union. These are the venture capitalists who put money into a startup that might wind up to be Google, or Roku kept their money there. So that gives you a sense of some of the new businesses that are risky and are shots that eventually maybe they'll become bigger and then get listed on Wall Street. But they're private. So this is private equity. I want everyone to think of Shark Tank, on CNBC, where you pitch a story or pitch a product, and they're gonna give you a couple $100,000, but maybe it's a little more than that, $10 million for a tech startup. And venture capitalists are these people who have a lot of money. So we're basically coming to the rescue of wealthy investors. All right, this is a bank that was, and here's the part about, is it incompetence? It's that they were so consolidated, and the money train, when the markets are moving up, and when when it's the water's flowing, then the good times keep rolling, right? And people start taking risk. And so they took it in a few sectors, and startup tech for a year and a quarter have been going nothing but down. And the funding mechanism, bonds, have been going nothing but down. So the this is all going backwards, and they were way over their skis in terms of taking risk. So yes, that's incompetence. We don't see that with other banks as much. I'm not a banking expert. I just follow the emotions, like you say, as you see on a chart, and teach people how to look at that. But those are the statistics. It's mind-boggling that in 24 hours you could see deposits, like when you put your paycheck into a bank each week or each month, that a quarter of those could be gone in 48 hours or 24 hours. So that looks engineered and looks to be like a crime to me, an engineered bank run. If anyone's ever watched Silicon Valley from HBO, there are these great scenes where they come in and they pitch their startup idea. There's one with Bachman and Jin Yang, who are two characters, a very eccentric characters, and he's pitching seafood, like Shazam.
Oh, I get it. SEE food. And by the way, I don't know if you
Seafood.
noticed this. Let me make it nice and big. I put on the Bachman just for you. See how I shaved?
Oh yeah,
kinda
right.
So Bachman has a little bit higher over here. Mine's a little bit lower, but
You got to do the chops too. Ehrlich's got some really big chops.
it's just very the chops will grow in. You can see it's all empty here, and yeah, but I'll get it going for you. I was trying to do that for you so that when you talked about this scene, I'd be ready for you. But please continue. Go ahead.
So those are VCs. Those are venture capitalists. They're people with money connected to rich families that have money that want to take some risk and buy Yahoo when it's small, or some of these. I got an app idea. Okay, well you need $10 million to hire engineers and make it work, right? So that's where who park their money there. Also, those tech firms had their money there. This doesn't really affect any of the big ones besides Roku, is that I can see. I'll say right off that all of those people who had deposits there are going to be made whole. They can get to their money today. So even though
this is an SVB, right? You're talking about an SVB, because that's
the Silicon Valley Bank, and also Signature Bank as well, that was connected to them. So you have some people that were not diversified, and they're also not dealing with normal clients like us, right? Who are not from a wealthy family and sling around, hey, I want $10 million in this company, right?
Yeah.
So that's that, and people are asking, why are we okay? Well, here's the first number. I was trying to promise that I wouldn't use any numbers, but this isn't a bad one. The FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which we learn about, I think, a lot in high school, in backstop savings accounts, so that if there's someone who robs the bank, there's fraud, they will insure and let us get our deposits. And they raised that amount to $250,000 after the financial crisis in 2008 and 9. By the way, in 2008 and 9, the FDIC had to go back to Congress, I think twice, because they ran out of money. It was so bad. So the whole financial system back then was bankrupt. So now the FDIC is saying they will make all of the people at this bank who had deposits over $250,000. I mean, if you have $500,000 in cash, please let me know. You're buying. But those people who have $1 million, $3, $4, $5 million in the bank, you're going to be made whole. You can, so the FDIC is ensuring that. Congress provides the tax dollars for that. Okay. And then there's also the assets that banks typically hold to get a little money, right? Pension funds, banks, they use fixed income stuff like treasuries. And the problem is the value of those treasuries have gone down big time.
Did they go down because of the hike in the interest rates, or just the fact that there's a long-term bonds, which are supposed to be more secure, but they had to cash them out a lot earlier because they have no liquidity? because
Yeah.
there's no easy way to get money because of the interest rates, and nobody's, everybody's. I would assume with the interest rates going up, Zach, that a lot of people have to tap into their savings. If you can't access loans, you're going to have to take more of your money out of your banks. So you have
Right.
to maybe cash in your crypto to fiat, take that out if you're somebody who's into that. But
Yep.
either way, the high interest rates would lead to less cash and less liquidity from these banks, forcing them to cash out these long-term bonds, which they thought. And I just don't want to say it's not just the long-term bonds. You've also mentioned that they invested into tech startups, which are very risky in a lot of ways. And I think it was a great video because you might not have made a dime. You just have an idea, but you need all this money to get this app started or whatever it is, or, you know what I'm saying? So there's not like, it's like a restaurant where I'm like, hey man, we've opened up these 2 restaurants and we've been making $2 million a year. You want to open up more restaurants? You have chips in the bank. You're already making that money, not with tech startups. But I also believe that this company invested heavily in ESGs, which we'll get to down the road. So there is some form of negligence, but there's also it's the times and it's the Fed putting the screws to these smaller banks.
Well,
correct?
there's 2 beliefs, and I'm in the camp that the bond markets move and the Fed follows. Okay, so historically, I know that's not what TV says, and the news likes to think that the news causes markets to move, but markets move before the news hits. The news explains what you see on TV. The job of the journalist is to explain what happened. They don't predict anything, and the Fed. I know the narrative is that the Fed causes things by raising rates, but the bond market moves first, and the Fed follows. So the people who buy and sell bonds. So the problem is, when you get inflation, bonds go down.
Yeah.
And so
people can't buy them,
bonds.
right?
People sell them.
People sell them.
Then they buy commodities, right? So they buy oil, right? And so it's a fairly 1-to-1. A lot of times you can just look at that. The dollars.
What would you say percentage-wise was SVB's fault, and what percentage of it was it just the Fed? And please explain to the audience, because I think you said to me, maybe it was Clint Russell. I watched so many films, I'm getting it mixed up. But this was the largest hike from less than 1% to 5% in quite some time, Zach. So what percentage?
Zero.
Yeah,
ever. I mean, this is the fastest
highest ever.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's an acceleration. That's right. That is what's catching a lot of these pension, like the pension funds in England. Then the gilt in October last year, the British government had to help out. So remember, conservative pension funds, banks, even funds of universities, all these kind of big money places are very conservative, and they want just money flow, right? They want to buy some bonds and not a lot of risk. These guys at Silicon Valley thought they were cowboys and were pretty risky. Part of the issue is that the long-term bonds sold off, but what sold off faster and rose in terms of rates was the short term. So, and we call that the yield curve. Typically, you want to buy low, sell high, right? And that's what banks do. They borrow really cheap at 0 interest rates, and we've had that for 10 years since the financial crisis. And then, so there was no cost for them to do business. Banks printed money, buy low, sell high. Okay, and maybe they make a little slice in here. When you flip it, now by holding these things, they're not very valuable. They're not going to give you much cash, and more people are making more in deposits. So, like, for example, Sally Mae has a money market account that is paying, and pays a lot, but it's based on student loans. They pay 3.8%. That's more than a bond for 30 years. So you can just put your stick money in cash and make more money than doing these treasuries. So that dynamic tightens conditions, always leads to recessions. It's bad for businesses, and people are using their credit cards. That data is part of the reality, is that they can't make the payments.
Yeah.
So
Let's look
I
at
want to
Uncle
say
Joe.
JP Morgan's the answer. JP Morgan
JD
caused this.
Morgan.
Yeah, I mean moving deposits. I mean you yank deposits out in 24 hours. Who you tell me who's going to be standing? Any bank, you do that to any bank in the United States and it's game over.
Hmm.
They're going to close you. If 24 hours all of a sudden everyone pulls their money out. So it's a bank
So
run
JP Morgan led to this bank run pretty much.
according to Bloomberg. Yes.
Quote, yeah. What do
I'd
you
like to
think
see those
from your
people in
expertise?
jail.
Yeah, all right. So and why? What was the? Did they make it? Did they have they disclosed why they did it or no? Or
Well,
they're not even
at
saying.
Silicon Valley Bank was raising money, so I think they were doing what's called an offering. So they offer shares of stock or maybe preferred shares or maybe bonds, and people buy them, and then the bank gets money. So they needed cash. That's kind of the reality, is that banks don't have a lot of cash flow. The small and medium banks, credit unions, they issue mortgages. You go to them to get a car loan. You go to them, for your student loan, maybe, and for your business loan. So all of that has the door is closed, right? So that's bad for business. That just cuts off the ability for businesses to I need to buy inventory every month. Well, that just got more expensive, right?
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
need to buy more buy food for my restaurant on a monthly basis, and they use their credit card for that. Well, that got more expensive.
yeah,
Yeah. So all of that background is a threat to all banks right now.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think in Europe and Asia, there's particular threats. Um, for example, Credit Suisse has been on a downward track, is probably going to zero, in my opinion. What do I know? But it won't take too much. Europe is freaked out about this too.
Let's we'll get into that right after this because we do have a little couple articles too you can refer to that you sent me yesterday. There was a scare of a run on banks in Bolivia, in Singapore, and London. So this is getting scary because I think a lot of people look to the United States, see what's happening on Wall Street, what's happening with those banks and our central banks, and then they start freaking out over there because it just seems like it could be a chain effect. And we've talked about, this is the foreign policy aspect, is that when we go into these other countries, we force IMF loans on them. So everything is connected right now. And that's why the Iran, Saudi Arabia kind of coming together, being nice and playing friendly, can really spell doom for a lot of people who are heavily invested in the Western markets. But let's listen to President Shit for Brains and see what he has to say as far as, and really, to tell you the truth, this is just so telling because, it's like they've done a decent job reading the public mindset right now. They remember 2008. They remember what they did. They remember the effect it had on people. People caught on and were like, you bailed out the banks and you left us high and dry. And they were like, oh, we got to do it to save the system. But they fucked everybody in the process. Now he comes out and leads with, hey, screw those guys. I'm going to protect you. Of course, he does the Donald Trump thing, too, as well, which Biden has been doing. This is something they learned from Donald Trump. No matter how bad it is or the situation, or even if you didn't do anything at all, still blow sunshine up your own party's ass and give yourself compliments and credit, even when you don't deserve it. Here's Uncle Joe. Let's take a listen.
Before I leave for California, I want to briefly speak about what's happening in Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. Today, thanks to the quick action of my administration over the past few days, Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe. Your deposits will be there when you need them. Small businesses across the country, the deposit accounts at these banks can breathe easier knowing they'll be able to pay their workers and pay their bills. And their hardworking employees can breathe easier as well. Last week, when we learned of the problems of the banks and the impact they could have on jobs of small businesses and the banking system overall, I instructed my team to act quickly to protect these interests. They've done that. On Friday, the government regulator in charge, the FDIC, took control of Silicon Valley Bank's assets. And over the weekend, it took control of Signature Bank's assets. Treasury Secretary Yellen and a team of banking regulators have taken action, immediate action. And here are the highlights. First, all customers who had deposits in these banks can rest assured, rest assured they'll be protected and they'll have access to their money as of today. That includes small businesses across the country that bank there and need to make payroll, pay their bills, and stay open for business. No losses will, and this is an important point, no losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Let me repeat that. No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Instead, the money will come from the fees that banks pay into the deposit insurance fund. Because of the actions that our regulators have already taken, every American should feel confident that their deposits will be there if and when they need them. Second, the management of these banks will be fired. If the bank is taken over by FDIC, the people running the bank should not work there anymore. Third, investors in the banks will not be protected. They knowingly took a risk, and when the risk didn't pay off, investors lose their money. That's how capitalism works. And fourth, there are important questions of how these banks got into the circumstance in the first place. We must get the full accounting of what happened and why those responsible can be held accountable. In my administration, no one is above the law. And finally, we must reduce the risks of this happening again. During the Obama-Biden administration, we put in place tough requirements on banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank.
Okay, well,
It is
yes,
almost
so-
comical, right? It is
yeah,
almost
well,
comical.
it's true. I want everyone to understand that it's true that the FDIC and Treasury and Fed are all working together and did a press conference, and they now, if any bank, they seem to be saying that any bank that gets in trouble, they'll insure all their depositors, because that's what they're doing here. I would really like to know how much money that pile of money might be. There's another piece to this that I don't believe he mentioned. That is this 25 billion coming from Treasury and another undisclosed amount from the Fed to buy up any of these Treasury assets that have fallen and lost value as collateral to get a 1-year loan. Okay. And let me tell you, and so they estimate 600, now this could be wrong. It's estimated that there's $600 billion in losses on these long-term bonds, treasuries, that banks hold. So they're collateral. Like when you buy something, you got to put money down. You got to put collateral down. Banks hold collateral too. $600 billion, over $500 billion. That's enough to take this economy down. And that they're going to be treated as par. Even though they're probably worth $60, they're going to be treated as if they're worth $100. So where does that money come from that we're all of a sudden going to make these treasuries whole for, what is that? $200 billion worth? Where is that coming from?
Well, that is a good
the
question.
bigger
I
story.
do want to point out a few things. Number one, he said that your money is secured, right? This is something in 2008 where everybody got left holding the empty satchel. There was nothing in it when they went in it because the banks got bailed out and everybody lost their money. Pretty much all these bankers took all your finances and played Russian roulette and lost, and you had to pay the price. He also mentioned, number two, that management will get fired because that's something they did. Nobody paid a price last time, right? Nobody had to. There were people who kept their fucking jobs in the midst of these collapse. Three, he's saying this time, and this is once again, he wants to seem like he's the protector of the little man. The investors, they're not insured. We're going to insure you guys, Zach. You had an account. You had $72 in it. We got your back. But the big investors, they're going to get screwed because they took a risk. So screw them this time. And then we're going to make sure that we get the full story. Not taking any accountability in what happened with the Fed and not taking any accountability of the dominoes that fell, not taking any accountability all the money was printed. You know what I'm saying? I mean, once again, the Democrats are blaming Donald Trump for being the deregulator in chief. Donald Trump is blaming anything when it comes to inflation or any banking fault on Joe Biden for his negligence. Meanwhile, he signed the CARES Act where they printed so much fucking money.
And they never
number five,
got the housing money either.
What's that?
Please tell me if they ever gave out the housing money that they were supposed to give to the homeowners. That's the crime, right? Where was that? They held the money. Congress authorized it. Where is it? That was mainstream America.
Yep. Yeah. Well, they always make it hard to access that they put in an account. And then that's where you have to look in those bills from all those states. Like so many states for the COVID had that COVID money. They never issued it out. And they complained that there was, people were complaining there was too much red tape or they didn't know how to access it. And then the fifth part was we're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again, which I think that you were pointing out to me yesterday that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, that what they're going to do is they're going to backdoor bail them out. They're just putting different language on what happened, different from what happened in 2008. But this time it's almost identical, maybe not identical, but they're going to bail out the big boys again. And he says not $1 is coming from taxpayer dollar. Where are they getting this money from?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it may be taxpayer. Maybe it didn't come from Congress right now, but it will in the future when you pay the debt, because the Fed's doing this. Is this going to go on the Fed's balance sheet? Absolutely. I don't think that in 2008 that depositors lost things, but absolutely people who were investors lost everything. Now, the big difference here is there's the big five that were involved in mortgages. Now the subprime issue is in auto loans, and it's bigger than it was with the mortgages back then. That should scare you. Also, but people borrowed to then get into the market is enormous, is at record highs. So in other words, people borrowed money to buy stocks on the way up. They do that when things are going up. People take risk. Everything's good, looks good. Everyone's a superhero. You hear Disney makes awesome superhero movies or whatever, but when things are falling like they have for the year and a half, Lord of the Rings stinks. They have terrible characters. You start to hear death metal music and fashion changes. People, get more conservative. You've seen that trend. And that's where we are. That's where we were in 2008 when they euthanized Lehman, which was one of the competitors of JP Morgan and Goldman, right? So this is not necessarily going to affect those big five, but they did euthanize this bank, I think, and they're trying to trigger quantitative easing to get free money again. And they're the ones that benefit. You pay for it through taxation and debt, and the destruction of savings. So old people can't save any money, get any money in a checking account. So we are in a negative vibe, and we're on a shelf, and the market sold it today. So the market doesn't buy it. They think it's a bailout.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that I think a lot of people don't understand that this is about the big banks swallowing up all the small banks too, as well. It's not just about, the small banks falling on their ass. It's about them getting swallowed up. Here's the next question. What about this situation? Because you brought this to my attention. SVB. I'm still saying SBF, like Samuel
Silicon Valley.
I know SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, fallout spreads around the world from London to Singapore. More than 100 founders and CEOs are writing to the UK Chancellor. They're freaking out. Here's the other one we put up. Bolivia's central bank pledges to demand currency peg as residents scramble for cash. You can see there's a nice big line. There looks like a run on banks from what's happening over here in the United States. And it looks like it's happening globally. So how does the fallout of these banks like Silicon Valley Bank and other banks lead to a global issue with other central state banks?
Well, the problem is dollars, which is where we started the show. And I've actually been communicating with people, diplomatic corps in South Asia, all over the world this morning, saying, I hope someone's talking about dollar swaps, because what happens and what happened in 2009 is that people hold on to dollars, right? And it's because they're going to have to pay debt in dollars, and they might not even, so then you've got this problem where the whole thing locks up. Okay, like I said the other day, that people don't answer the phone on the other side, and you can't do deals. And in the international currency markets, we still need dollars to get debts paid. International, so Bolivia is going to defend a peg of their currency, right, and to the dollar, and so they're going to have to take actions in certain ways. It has to do with that dynamic. So it's about the dollar. Plus, their banks may hold some of this, may invest in U.S. banks. They may hold treasuries, and they're taking losses too. So their collateral is going down. Yeah,
gotcha.
So, and in Europe, I really think Europe is where it's going to start really big time. I mean, maybe it started last October.
So this next part over here. Okay, so it says the Federal Reserve announces emergency lending facility, deposits to be guaranteed. My question to you was, is this a desperate strategy right now that's enacted to stall people from going on these bank runs while the Western bankers try to figure something out or to get something in play? Is this going to work? I mean, because you're trying to tell me that a lot of people are trying to say they're trying to stop bank runs. But the first thing my mom asked me today was like, what should I do? I'm like, Mom, go get a big chunk of your money out and put it in your safe. Get it in cash. Like, go get. So is this strategy going to work to stall people from going and stopping these bank runs? Or do you think this is going to be more of a situation where it's too late? Cat's out of the bag. Cards are starting to fall. They already saw what happened in 2008. I think there was a lot of people in 2008 that regret not having a decent amount of money taken out or diversified in other things other than the bank. Because when they went to the bank with their bank card, nothing was there.
I did that happen? I mean, I think that people lost their investments, but but as far, I mean, the FDIC was very active, so maybe some people did have problems withdrawing.
Well, they didn't lose just their money in the banks. They lost their pension funds were gone and all their investments. So let me state that correctly. But
and mortgages.
They could have cashed them out earlier, right? Like a lot of people were telling you, get into your pension funds now, get some of that out and diversify that money.
Well, that's always a good idea. I always teach traders before they start learning trading to do an emergency account with laddered CDs in a short term to get, you'd be able to get your money back because it's cash. Also, money markets. Now, in the financial crisis, the money markets, which are basically credit cards for businesses, froze and locked up. There were annuities that insure that also hold these sorts of products, locked up and failed. So you're asking me what when the financial system fails, is it going to fail? I hope not. Is the market saying we're going to have an enormous bear market? Yeah, it is. Which means lower prices, unemployment, and business failures, which is tragic and terrible. How can you defend yourself against that? Hard assets. Your home you can live in. You can't live in stocks. I think that you can if you have retirement portfolios, cash is a position, and there's nothing wrong with having it in cash or even taking some out. I'm starting to see people having trouble taking money out, which is a sign of stress. So you might not, so sometimes these I don't see quite the exposure because they use short-term rates. So they're not quite like banks when you talk about like a TD Ameritrade or Schwab, although Schwab's in play today. So what in the world do they own? So it's really more on the retirement side, could get really whacked. If you're in retirement, you shouldn't be holding risk assets.
I think it's about seeds, right? The Big Short, he goes, the real currency is going to be the seeds. You got to get the good seeds.
Go long a vegetable garden.
It's right. Like
do.
What does Steve say? Grow food, make bullets. You know what I'm saying? Like that's about what you could do right now.
Have a good community. Get to know your neighbor. Yes, grow some of your own food. You don't have to become a complete homesteader, but that's a food security can be an issue because these systems are we just saw that. We just lived through food disruption. We're still seeing that. So, hello.
Hi. Hey, fam.
Hi. I'll let you guys finish up since
I
have no idea where you are.
Last question.
We're just talking about the end of the world. It's all.
That's it.
Yeah, of course.
Well, the end of our currency. Fee, I hope you're getting some ruples because your dollar is actually backed by gold, commodity, oils, really good stuff. It actually has a legitimate value, unlike the dollar that's just $20 because they say it's $20. So this last article I wanted to bring up really quickly, and we'll just go over to it because it's like we said, Joe Biden comes out and he talks exactly the opposite of what happened in 2008, right? Like this time I'm going to make sure that the people's money are going to be made whole. All the investors this time can go eat shit. All the managers are going to be fired. And don't worry, the taxpayer is not going to pay for all this money to secure all these finances that went kaput. It's going to be put on the backs of the bankers. But correct me if I'm wrong here. You were trying to say to me, maybe, and this is what I was trying to get the gist of it, is that no, they're going to still do like kind of this backdoor bailout. The narrative is different, but at the end of the day, they're going to make sure the bankers are made whole. When have we ever seen the bankers be held accountable for their actions, whether it be in war, because all wars are bankers' wars, or when they had crashed the economy like they did last time? The last time a bank was able to fold, I think, was Washington Mutual. Aside from that, in 2008, they took our money, went to the casino and lost, and then the federal government gave them that money, Zach.
Yeah. Well, they did euthanize Lehman, and there were several banks that did go down, but those are the competition of Goldman Sachs
Exactly.
and JP Morgan. And you're seeing that again. And again, I want the headline. Please share this with your Russian colleagues, that the headline should be, who's going to jail when a banking officer encourages people to pull their deposits and encourages a run on the bank, which looks like what happened. Now, you tell me how 25% of deposits get removed. So people at the end of the story need to understand three things. One, it's banking conditions are tough. It's hard to get a loan, and things are going to get really hard for Americans, and investments probably are going further south and could get cut in half. That at least is kind of my work. Number two, also your deposits, the FDIC, if the federal government can make sure that you go to the bank, your savings account, your checking account are safe. That's what they've put in place. Number three is the last point that you made, which is that they've written a blank check for what appears to be at least $600 billion of failing treasury bonds, and they're going to make that whole. So they're going to fill in the gap, the hole, and for these banks or other banks that have stress. So I'd love to know. That sounds like taxpayer money, and everyone says that's a bailout.
And these
That
are
is
banks
the
that took
story
risk.
that needs to be reported.
Yeah.
Huh?
Banks that took risk, they're going to get bailed out again.
Well, those assets they'll be able to take treasuries and sell them back to the Treasury Department or the Fed. Instead of at $6, they'll be able to sell them for 10, right? So instead of 60, they'll be 100 at par, which the minute traders saw that, they're like, here we go again. Because in 2008, in March, in the Senate Banking Committee, they changed the rules for FASB Rule 13, which was, well, what's this piece of garbage worth? Well, is it worth $2, $0? Let's let you say it's worth 100. Par. Here we go again. So they just changed reality, changed the accounting rules, and I guess the debt went away. And here they go again. They're going down this trail again, and they've got, you tell me what they're going to do with $600 billion of on the books losses, and they usually hold to maturity, so they don't have to report that as a loss. But it's so bad that now it is causing a cash flow problem.
Fam, do you have any other questions? Because go ahead.
No, not really. You guys have been discussing for a while now, and I just want to say it's no coincidence that the same person that was at the Lehman Brothers before has been involved here as well. And this is, that just goes to show you that there is no accountability for any of this, that they will always be bailed out, the banks and the people in charge. This is what on a macro scale, the idea that Americans should focus on Russia or China when their own country is pretty much sinking it. And there's a lot of theories that this is a programmed collapse, that this has been a long time coming. There's a lot of people saying, this is all part of a plan. I tend to be careful with that sort of thing because I do feel like some of it is reductionist, but I do think that in some ways they can sink the right people, meaning they can sink the working class, and all of these people, like the former CFO of the Lehman Brothers, will still come out on top. They'll still be okay. Whereas the people that have a regular person that has a second mortgage that is, is in a very fragile position right now in their investments or whatever. Those people are the ones that are going to see it. And when you look at in a capitalist system, when you look at what is going on, and I predicted that this would happen, because I have friends that work in real estate and friends that work in the mortgage lending industry, and their companies were literally firing people left and right. And I could tell that there was something that was going to happen. And of course, now we see this. But when you look at that, then you see that it's not just obviously, the more working class populations in terms of retail, in terms of hospitality, in terms of, that sort of profession, the gig economy that is being affected. Now you have what is known in the capitalist system as the middle class being affected, people involved in real estate, which is pretty much the backbone of the United States. The country really moves throughout the real estate economy pretty much in the United States. And so when you see that being hurt, then you can see how the collapse is happening. And I do think what we're going to talk about next, Pasta, with what's going on with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China, I think that has a lot to do with it as well. This shift away from the US dollar, de-dollarization, a new sort of type of economic system, not just a geopolitical system, but an economic system where things are not just unipolar in terms of the United States. So I think that's all going to come into play at the macro level. And on the micro level, of course, Americans, everyday working class Americans will end up losing. And I think people should, as you mentioned, really look to diversify their assets, really look to where to put their money in, because it's just not a stable market to have your money in right now. So great discussion.
And it's your money. I want people to understand that a broker works for you. And so you tell them what to do. A lot of them don't want you to go into cash because then you can take it out. It's your money. You earned it. You're exactly right. Auto foreclosures spiking worse than, and that's where the subprime problem is. And it's worse than 2008 levels. And also mortgage sales, not the prices, are still high. Mortgage sales down 40% per capita, faster than any mortgage sales per capita, faster than any time ever. So you want to talk about a sudden change? People aren't able to sell their house.
Yeah.
And we have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Once again, you're going to see a lot of the conservative populist right come out and blame the ESG factor. It says the Fed is extending loans against high quality assets to banks for nearly zero interest to prevent a run on the banks Monday, all because the SVB, which is a Silicon Valley Bank. Thank you. Didn't insure over 89% of their deposits and instead hedged on failing funds that offered sustainable finance and carbon neutral operations to support a healthier planet. In other words, the fools running the bank were woke and almost became broke. But the Democrats and the Fed swooped in to make sure their woke donors at SVB didn't go under. But how many other small banks will be swept up into this pending disaster? The serious threat here is that with full loans to banks on basically next to zero interest from the Fed will drive down the value of assets owned by the banks that aren't in trouble, and that will cause them to be in trouble. They are manufacturing a bank crisis. This should not be happening. I would like her to also say that she didn't say shit when her Mr. President signed one of the highest spending bills out there, where it printed out more money in the history of money than any other fucking bill. And all that money mostly went to the banks and very little went to the people.
Well, she's correct in some ways that, and she nails it because Washington's political, right? So the venture capitalists are not people like us, right? They are wealthy investors, and they got made whole in their deposits, and they could be losing some deposits in a normal reality. So yeah, they did bail out a bunch of investing people, a bunch of rich venture capitalists, who are millionaires typically. So yeah, those deposits were made whole. That is an interesting bailout. She's right about that. And the FDIC says we're going to do this for everybody. I'd love to know how the FDIC they don't have enough money to do that nationwide. Now the ESG part,
more money.
Yeah, well, hey, there you go. Hey,
Which,
well,
by
why
the
are
way,
we paying
before the
taxes?
ESG part too, that goes exactly against number 3 with Donald Trump. Joe Biden said, he goes, the investors, they're on their own. I'm going to bail out the small guy. He fucking
They,
lied through his
they did
teeth.
get fired. They did get fired when the bank got wound down, and all of the shares are halted and went to zero and liquidated. So investors did lose, but the people who were venture capitalists who had deposits over 250,000, you got more than 250,000 in your bank? Me, I
No.
don't. So that's what you're talking about, and these are Democratic donors, and it's Silicon Valley. Yeah, this does paint the picture that, look, I've been an ESG trader because I believe that, for example, Citigroup was not socially responsible, but yet was still part of the socially responsible funds. So I created this business, Green Hedges, to look at that and to provide a critical voice and teach traders how to not get screwed and not listen to all of Wall Street's bullshit, and manage it yourself. So I think it is a good thing to look at ethics and whether or not a board hires one woman changes the entire profitability in a boardroom. That's interesting stats. These companies tend to outperform. They tend to be more, have better management. That's what the data show. Over 30, 40 studies have been done on this. So, they do get a bump from being socially aware because they're not as lunkheaded. But I do feel that in the last 8 years, 6 years, a lot of things that are ethical have been turned into weapons. Like if you can put a handle on it, someone's going to swing it the wrong way. And ESG wokeism is just one case of that, where it's groupthink, right? And so groupthink is really dangerous in an investing committee. That means that you're not paying attention to risk. You're not paying attention to diversification. Oh, let's all get all the Silicon Valley people and let's be the coolest cats at the party. That's what that is. And don't think they all go to the same parties over in Berkeley and in Silicon Valley. So, there's a great scene in Silicon Valley, the HBO film, where they said, you can't even smoke here, right? Like if someone finds out that the one of the portfolio managers is like smoking around the corner outside, because if anyone finds out she's smoking, she'll be banned and be verboten. So yeah, it's groupthink, and she has a right to say this, but she's political, so.
Yes, she is. Zach Moore is a professional trader and the president of Green Hedges, which is a financial education company. You can hit him up, Zach, at gogreenhedges.com or at greenhedges1 on Twitter. Also, Green Hedges on the Facebook. Zach Moore, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with everything you do. We'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.
My pleasure.
Come back and educate us some more, buddy.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Famalam.
Hi guys. That was a long interview.
Yes, it
thank you
was.
for holding it down. So yeah, I didn't want to make this a super long show, but I did think it was important to talk about that. So I'm glad you were able to talk about that. Then I think it's also important to talk about what I mentioned regarding the brokering of peace and rebuilding bilateral ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia, two longtime rivals, two countries that people thought would never, ever be talking to each other. And here we are, China has been able to do that while the United States is trying to wage war with China and Russia. This is what China is accomplishing. And I'm not here to just give all these accolades to China, but we have to recognize what is what. Like, it's not like I go around telling everybody how much I love Xi Jinping, because that's what the first thing people are going to say, especially on the conservative end, that, oh my God, you're praising China. But I'm sorry. China's in a position where they lifted people out of poverty. China's in a position where they are promoting peace throughout the entire world. They're trying to find a solution to the conflict in Ukraine. They've remained neutral. I'm not neutral on that position, but China as a country has tried to be as diplomatic as possible. And in comparison to the United States, especially looking at it from outside of the United States, looking at it from Moscow, we're seeing China emerge in this new multipolar world. And I think this is the biggest news that a lot of people don't realize how big it is. It is probably the biggest news we've seen this entire year. This is a big deal. This really marks a new era. The SVB thing, yeah, it's big, but I think that has been hyped way more than really, because that was every economist last year that knew was worth a dime was predicting a crash in 2023. It wasn't just me. Like, I'm not an economist, and I was able to predict that. And so this is like something that I think is also kind of shows why we are also going through this. Now, we can discuss whether or not that crash is manufactured or not. I think to a degree it is. I think to a degree they don't care about sinking everyday people. But this is, I think, the one thing, Pasta, that I don't think the West was predicting. I really, really do not think they had this in their cards, that they knew that this would happen. I think they're very smart and they've been able to manipulate a lot of things, but I really don't think the United States and NATO predicted this one. Saudi Arabia and Iran are to restore ties in this China brokered deal. Did you want to say something before I go into it?
Well, I think it just tied right into the actual dollar, because this is what we're talking about. The reason why the dollar has any value is because that it's the petrodollar, that we made a deal with Saudi Arabia a long time ago, which was to sell their oil in dollars, right? So American dollars are being used, and therefore that's what gives our dollar a lot of value. Now, if you watch the Convo Couch, you would have saw last year we reported on Saudi Arabia and Iran starting to talk about their embassies. You know, we were talking about it. A lot of people didn't mention it. So when we saw this here, this was like, okay, this is what we talked about last year. It's coming to fruition. If China starts making deals with Saudi Arabia and they start, selling their oil or selling it off in, the digital yuan or in any type of Chinese currency, that's really going to affect the dollar here at home, because that's the only thing that's really propping up our dollar is the fact that Saudi Arabia has agreed to sell the majority of the oil they have in dollars. And if this happens right over here, right, and all of a sudden now they start cutting us out, Saudi Arabia starts moving towards BRICS, that spells doom for the United States dollar because it's not backed by anything.
Yeah, so this is a major deal, both politically in terms of the global geopolitical aspect and economically in terms of the de-dollarization and where everything is going, right? Nearly every major country in the global south and the east is pretty much trying to find an alternative to being dependent on the dollar. And so that's what is de-dollarization. You can look at what's going on in South America and the attempt to do that. Also the attempt to nationalize certain industries. And of course, what Russia's been doing, trading rubles to rupees for the oil with Pakistan, India, and opening these new markets with China. This is pretty much caused by the United States and NATO's desire to isolate Iran, to isolate Russia, and to isolate China. In those ways, specifically Iran and Russia, they have found new allies. And this is, again, also a product of what happened last year, not too long ago in 2022, with Saudi Arabia in the U.S. So we're seeing all of that come right now. So, Fam, if you can go down. So I'm just going to.
I do want to point out that is what we talked about last year. This is what happened in Tehran, and this is when they closed the embassy, when the smoke rise fire. The Iranian protesters set fire to the Saudi embassy. We were kind of talking about what was the involvement of the Revolutionary Guard. How could they let this happen? But it seems like they let it happen, and that went into a spiral of bad relationships. But now to bring it back to the table 7 years later, this is looking very positive for Iran and China and Russia, and it's looking very bad for the United States. Go ahead, buddy. Sweetheart. Sorry. Fam. My bad.
So after 7 years of tension, Riyadh and Tehran will reopen embassies and revive a 2001 security agreement. So Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed on Friday to resume diplomatic ties and reopen embassies within the next 2 months. This is big. The embassies being open, going from closed to open, is a huge deal. Relations between the Sunni kingdom and the Shia Republic broke down in 2016, as Pasta mentioned, and the two powers have backed opposing sides in multiple regional conflicts. So this isn't just Sunni and Shia. This goes beyond that. The agreement came after several days of talks in Beijing. As a result of the negotiations, both countries agreed to reopen their embassies within a period not exceeding 2 months and to commit to non-interference in each other's internal affairs, according to a joint statement by Saudi, Iranian, and Chinese officials. Additionally, Riyadh and Tehran said they would resume a security cooperation agreement signed in 2001 and would work to enhance, quote, regional and international peace and security. So, as Pasta mentioned, they had severed diplomatic ties with Iran. Saudi Arabia had in 2016 after protesters stormed its diplomatic outposts following the kingdom's execution of a prominent Shia scholar several days earlier. So again, this has been coming. There were some talks held in 2021 and 2022. And they also had clashed on geopolitical issues. Saudi Arabia has close relationships with the U.S., while Iran has been sanctioned by Washington over its nuclear program. In fact, the United States has been calling this whole time for more sanctions against Iran. They're constantly talking about the Iran threat. That's what's been on the agenda. So the timing of this is extremely interesting because now we're seeing these calls to really, look into Iran, the Iran threat, the terror threat in Iran all over again, these terrorists, blah, blah, blah. And simultaneously, the rift that the United States had with Saudi Arabia, simultaneously, the conflict in Ukraine, simultaneously, you can't forget about Yemen, you can't forget about Syria and how the U.S. is stealing their oil. And now you have China, right? This global emerging economic power. I wouldn't say it's even emerging. I would say it's there. And then you have the de-dollarization going on, as well as inflation and just political, whether sabotage or just decline in the West, not just Europe, but also now, as you guys can see, the United States. So all of this coming together is a huge blow to the United States. It's a huge blow to NATO. It's a huge blow to the collective West and their power that they have. You can see it right now in real time dwindling. The empire is falling is essentially what you're seeing. And a new leader has emerged, and that leader is China. Because again, like I've been saying, behind Russia, behind all of this aggression towards Russia is really China, because China is the powerful economy here, more than Russia. And China, again, is a nuclear power that has once again reiterated its allyship to Russia and Iran. And of course, now you throw in Africa, you throw in Latin America, and you see this emerging multipolar world that we're seeing. And all that means is literally countries want to be able to be in good economic standing with each other, have relationships that are equitable, built on mutual respect, respecting each other's national sovereignty. Meaning, if China conducts its affairs with the Communist Party of China, then what does Iran do? What does Russia do? They say, okay, we're not communists. You do you, boo. That's literally it. Whereas like the United States is like, nah, you can't do that. And so it's literally in the most basic, simplistic terms, that's literally what it is. And that's all.
I'd like to point up, as I put your tweet here, that the 2016, what happened was in Saudi Arabia that they had executed a Shia cleric, right, inside Saudi Arabia. This was all pre-MBS. And I don't know if that has anything to do with that. I just want to point out, though, that the leadership in Saudi Arabia has changed since this whole thing set this off with these two countries started knocking heads. I don't know enough about MBS and Saudi Arabian politics, but he is a different leader. He wasn't the leader in line that was supposed to take the reins. He was not supposed to have the crown. He kind of had a form of a coup over there, a family coup. A lot of people feel that Trump and Kushner was heavily involved, that okayed this situation, but this is definitely a different leader. Remember, the situation that happened in 2016 was before MBS was in there, so I just want to point that out. As we go deeper into these stories, it is different leadership. So,
right. And out of everything that's happened recently, this is what I mentioned earlier. I don't think the West, especially the United States, foresaw China brokering peace between longtime rivals Iran and Saudi Arabia. Why do I say this? Because I don't think they would have allowed it. If they knew that this was happening, I don't think they would have allowed it. I think they would have done anything to stop it. Their plans against Iran would have been already happening, because there have been, some calls to go and attack Iran, to sanction Iran more, but it hasn't happened the way they wanted to yet. So I don't think they saw this in the cards. And this is not only a global geopolitical impact, as I mentioned, displaying the rise of multipolarity, but also an economic one, proving the West is waning power. The West is no longer calling the shots. Like, they can pretend all they want. You can see Biden and Samantha Powers and Victoria Nuland talk about, democracy and freedom, but a lot of people have just become cynical to that because they see really what's actually happening with the U.S. And now with what's going on in Georgia, it's very, very clear here that what's going on there is another attempt at another attack against Russia via a different front, similar to the Euromaidan of 2014, with the same NATO, EU, support, very organized, very, so these are like the last screeches, I think, of the empire. I don't think the dollar is going to collapse right away. I think this is going to take some time, but the fact is people are moving away to try to find new mechanisms, new means that leave these countries more independent of the dollar. And that's just de-dollarization. Basically, it's not going to be the one true currency. And a lot of these countries, they want to be able to trade in their currencies, whether it's the yuan, whether it's the ruble or the rupee. These countries, exist, and they want an equal standing with the rest of the world. And for too long, they've been just dismissed as, third world countries, developing countries. And that's quickly changing.
And by the way, what I had talked about really quickly too before, and this is why a lot of people, Steve had mentioned it this morning, and we didn't get to go deep into it. But remember, Soleimani was killed while killing a message to resolve Saudi tensions. That is not what the United States and Israel wanted. They did not want these two entities coming together. So the fact that he was willing to try to make peace with them, and he was such a high-ranking, figure within Iranian politics, a hero, that, what are we going to do? Well, we can't have those guys come together. Let's whack them, fam.
Right. That's why I think that they didn't foresee this.
Yeah.
Because they whacked, as you say, they whacked Soleimani, and that was under the Trump administration. So when people say Trump was this and that, I'm like, no, I'm sorry. That is, he killed, he okayed the death of a leader of a country. That's just unheard of. If somebody killed one of our leaders, do you think they'd be fine? This is just like the double standards that the US and NATO have set out for themselves. And another thing is, of course, what that potentially means for the region, because what a lot of people are saying, well, this will allow for more stability in the region because Iran, obviously, is more of an ally to Russia. Saudi Arabia has not been as pro-Ukraine as the West had wanted them to. So now really what we're discussing here is what are going to be the global implications of this. And there are many. So here's a couple of other tweets. And then I have a video from RT of a interview I did with somebody. And we can stop the interview because it's 7 minutes long, and then we'll discuss and then we'll continue. But this is Danny Haifong. Saudi Arabia and Iran have agreed to reestablish ties in the deal mediated by China and Beijing. Both countries expressed a commitment to sovereignty and non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. This is a massive victory for peace and multipolarity. I just want to highlight the commitment to sovereignty and non-interference in their internal affairs. Literally, if the United States were a country that would not interfere and would respect the internal affairs of these countries, it would have been the United States brokering this deal, with China. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm proud that our country is waging war instead of brokering peace. I would want our government to be doing that, but that's not what's happening. The opposite is happening. This is again, it's the government's own fault. It's the State Department's own fault. They're so arrogant by what they're trying to achieve politically, this objective that they're trying to achieve, that they're so blindsided by this arrogance where they think that they're invincible. And you see this with a lot of actual human beings that are psychopaths or narcissists, where they think nothing can defeat them, and literally they fall by the dumbest sort of thing. And I think this is something that they overlooked. I genuinely thought that they did. I don't think that they thought that Saudi Arabia and Iran were ever going to just become these peaceful, cooperative countries together. because of the religious aspect of it as well. So
Yeah.
that's the Saudi-Iran peace brokered by China today may very well be the cornerstone of petroleum, i.e. oil being sold for Chinese yuan. Exactly. Obviously, this detente also paves the way for both Saudi Arabia and Iran to join BRICS. And BRICS is a whole other aspect of this entire thing. BRICS is rising, it's getting bigger. So imagine a BRICS with three oil giants: Russia, Saudis, and Iranians. Russia and Iranians are already like huge allies. Now you enter Saudi Arabia. How hard will it be to create a new currency that's backed by oil and gas? Endless possibilities in a multipolar world. This is, I think, the biggest threat to the United States, because now, obviously, China is a huge threat, and they've said it as much. And they say, oh, it's our national security, blah, blah, blah. But it's more of an economic threat. Obviously, there's obviously military and a nuclear aspect with Iran and China. But now you have Russia, Iran, China, you have BRICS, all of these countries. I'm sorry, you have oil in all of these countries. The United States and NATO can't defeat that. They can't defeat that economically. They can't defeat that militarily. It's just a done deal.
They had to realize that something was coming down the pipe. I mean, I think Iran knew, and Saudi Arabia understood too as well. Like, you know what I'm saying? A possible team up with these guys, you know, can really help both countries out, you know, finances. Why do they got to constantly, you know, be in the coattails of the United States? I don't know where Saudi Arabia is at this juncture. You know, I paid a little attention to Saudi Arabia. When I talk to people about Saudi Arabia, they have no clue what's going on. They don't even understand that MBS was not even supposed to be the royal crown prince. Like, he wasn't, you know, part of the bloodline to do so, and that he took over, and then all of a sudden these other deals started happening. But how frisky, how much courage can Saudi Arabia muster up, right? Because there was a thought process that, you know, obviously we saw that Kushner and Donald Trump were behind the backing of MBS. They were cool with it. Saudi Aramco, the whole 9 yards. They gave them the blessing. You know, Saudi Arabia would never do anything within their own country without the permission from the United States. They are a propped up monarchy in that region, strictly surviving because of the United States, and they have a shit ton of fucking oil. So there was a lot of thought process when Biden came in. Remember, we talked about this, fam, because we talked about a couple shows about MBS. Will Biden go back to Mohammed bin Salman, who was supposed to be the heir to the royal, you know, to the throne? He was supposed to have power, which is different. I think there's two different things. I can't remember. There's the, like, they have like an Ayatollah position, which is like the king or whatever his job is, and then there's the crown prince, who kind of controls a lot of the aspects within the country. We said, will the Biden administration, when they come back in, because Mohammed bin Salman has direct ties to Langley. He's part of that crew. Will they put him back in, and will they coup MBS? That is the question right now. If they start taking payments in the digital yuan, or in the yuan general, in Chinese money, what does that mean for Saudi Arabia? Will the United States just sit back and let it happen?
Yeah,
I don't know.
think so.
I don't know.
Does
It's a
the
big
United
question.
States ever sit back and let something happen unless they already have something else planned? They don't. So again, this is probably the biggest deal in modern times that too many are not talking about, especially in the West. Unipolarity's death, and China is emerging a new leader, and the end of U.S.-led diplomacy. So this is, I interviewed a gentleman, and we can watch some of this interview and listen to some of what he says. He brings up a few great points.
Carlos Ruiz Miguel, professor of constitutional law at the University of Santiago de Compostela. Welcome, Carlos. How difficult do you think it was to get Iran and Saudi Arabia to this point where they've revived their diplomatic relations? And how significant is this for the region of the Middle East?
Well, I guess it was really difficult because the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia is a very, or it was a very deep and very acute rivalry. So, and actually, both countries were at the edge of a direct war, and both countries are involved in a proxy war in Yemen. So it was actually I guess it was very difficult to achieve this agreement. Moreover, I think that this will have enormous impact, not on politics in the Arabic Peninsula, but also in other areas, because it's the conflict could say, for instance, between Sunni and other branches of Islam, like Shia, is very also acute in Lebanon, for instance. So the impact of this agreement sure will have some effect on Lebanon, for instance, but also it will impact in other areas. And for instance, in the north of Africa also. So it's a very important, major development in international politics.
Many look at this as emerging multipolarity. Considering it was China that helped broker the deal, what does this mean for Beijing and its role in the Middle East?
Well, it's really an extremely important step. First of all, because I think this could be qualified as the first great political achievement of Chinese foreign policy outside its, could say, natural area. So this is a success for China foreign policy that also will give more credibility to its initiative to bring peace to Ukraine, for instance, where many in the West have cast some doubts on Chinese initiative. And now, with this success, the Chinese initiative becomes much more credible than it was before.
Well, timing is everything. What do you make of the timing of the deal? Does it have anything to do potentially with the relations between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, having been strained by the Saudi decision last year to cut oil production?
Well, the timing also is extremely important because many of Israel-USA politics, it was clear, the messages of the Israel Prime Minister were very clear that he was ready to launch an attack against Iran that maybe could be a nuclear attack that in order to avoid the development of the Iranian nuclear program. So in this respect, in a frame where first Israel is threatening Iran in an extremely dangerous way, and in a frame where Saudi Arabia began an approach to Israel, this is a message to Israel and its ally, the USA, that in the event of an attack against Iran, Iran will not be isolated in the Islamic world. So this move comes in a critical moment where Israel and USA were planning an attack against Iran. So I think this move could prevent eventually this attack, or at least will make the deciders in Israel and USA to think about this eventual attack and its consequences.
Okay, so he made some really good points. There was three of them off the top of my head. This will also affect the region. So obviously Africa, the north of Africa, Lebanon. He mentioned just these relationships will definitely affect how the rest of the region plays out. He also mentioned that China has now brokered a peace deal between two countries. They're also pushing a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. now that's going to see, oh, well, China was able to do this. Maybe we should look to them to lead us to peace on this conflict instead of the US and NATO, who haven't really done anything, and the collective West, who have more so tried to ramp up the conflict. And then the last aspect, which I think is the most important one that he mentioned, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. The timing is what I asked, because the timing is everything. This is, of course, as the U.S. was preparing to really go after Iran again. And Israel, of course, we know has been going after Iran. Will this deter, put kind of a step into the plans of Israel and the United States to going after Iran and the supposed Iran threat? Because now Iran isn't alone. Iran has Saudi Arabia, Iran has China, Iran has Russia. Will this sort of deter that situation? And could this also maybe in some ways, ramp up some of the warmongers that are hungry to go to war with pretty much anybody, right? Like that think, oh, there's a terrorist here, we got to get them over there so they don't get us over here. So it could go either way, I think. I've never seen the West to back off of something like this. They're going to continue pretending that it's okay, that Saudi Arabia is still, their go-to allies. I'm not saying that Saudi Arabia isn't going to do any dealings with the U.S. because that's not true. But this definitely puts an obstacle, I think, in the plans of going after Iran.
Yeah, this can go so many different ways, right? Like, do we see now another talk? Remember when Khashoggi was killed, and a lot of people in the in the Congress, people like Lindsey Graham, a lot of conservatives were barking about it. Once again, I thought that they wanted a reason to find a way to make sure that they could push whoever's in the White House to put back in their guy in Saudi Arabia, like Mohammed bin Salman, because it might have gotten away from them, and this can spell doom for them. So do we see a rehashing of that? Like some more evidence comes up that, they did chop this guy up and they did put him in a briefcase. They were also supposedly pissed off of his CIA ties, and they thought that he wasn't loyal. That is Khashoggi. He wasn't loyal to the kingdom, and that he was playing both sides, almost like a Fiorella double agent, right? So they were pissed off about that. So what do we see? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do they start going after Iran and deal with Saudi Arabia after? Do they test the waters out and see how Saudi Arabia responds to any type of messing around with Iran to see where their loyalty lies? This can go in so many different directions, and I'm just gonna have to pay close attention, to see what's happening. But it is a different world. If Saudi Arabia is now stepping outside the box and saying we're going to do business with China if we want to, we're going to do more business with Russia if we want to, which they already had a kind of nice. You remember Putin coming in and giving a nice high five to MBS and them hugging and whatnot and stuff. But so it was like, they were a little bit like kind of like fenced off at each other, where they were like, okay, we have oil, you have oil, screw you, screw us, but we're still going to be cool with each other. They still kept the lines of communication open. So this is just so freaking interesting, but it's not as surprising as a lot of people were like, oh my God, this is so surprising. And it does lead back to why they whacked Soleimani, because they didn't want him trying to broker any peace deals between the two. But we knew a year ago that they were starting to look into opening up these embassies, and China was sitting down at the table with them. So it's just one of those things to be continued. Let's keep our eye on it and see what's going on, because any type of like separation from Saudi Arabia to now, let's say if Saudi Arabia and the United States got into a hairy war and they broke ties, what happens to our dollar? The only way we're going to save ourselves, as far as not we, but meaning the empire, the only way the empire is going to save themselves is going to invade some other place, like Latin America. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Maybe rehash this, because Latin America doesn't have the oil, fam, but they got the lithium. So who knows? Which will lead us into our next story. Did you have anything else to say about this before we move on?
No, we can move on. It's a huge deal. We got to keep watching. But it's definitely marks, I think, the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. So I really do think that more people should be talking about it in that context as well, and what it's going to do in the region regarding especially Israel and those relationships, because Iran and Israel are clearly not friends. So there's that aspect as well.
Look at the framing on this. Here we are for Section 3. Fram, look at the framing of this shit. This is how disgusting Western media is. Mexico president threatens to meddle in U.S. elections to beat Republicans, corrupt to stop cartels. Fam, they're literally framing it as if AMLO is going to go in. And of course, they always like to, the Republicans like to frame it up. Look at, AMLO. He's, he does whatever Joe wants. Joe's in bed with the CIA. Joe's in bed with the cartels. Joe's bad, yada, 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 yada. But the framing to me alone is pretty disgusting. Leftist Mexican President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, also known as AMLO, threatened the Republican Party during a press conference on Thursday for wanting to use the U.S. military to destroy the nation's powerful multi-billion-dollar drug cartels. Obrador's, I know, right? It's Obrador's remarks come as Republican lawmakers and top officials like former Attorney General William Barr, we love him, have called for using U.S. military in recent weeks to put an end to the billions of dollars worth of drugs pouring into the U.S., which are responsible for tens of thousands of deaths per year. The cartels made $13 billion last year from human smuggling alone. The remarks from lawmakers come after 4 Americans were kidnapped in Mexico this week, and 2 of them ended up being murdered. We established our position at once. We are not going to allow any foreign government to intervene, much less the armed forces of a foreign government to intervene in our territory, he declared at a press conference. This is AMLO. And starting today, we are going to initiate any information campaign aimed at Mexicans who live and work in the United States and all Hispanics to inform them about what we are doing in Mexico and how this initiative from Republicans, besides being irresponsible, is an offense against the people of Mexico. So, fam, that is what they are saying is interference as a lack of respect to our independence for our sovereignty, he continued. And if they do not change their attitude and think that they are going to use Mexico for their propagandist, electioneering, and dirty political purposes, we are going to call for them not to vote for that party due to it being interventionist, inhumane, hypocritical, and corrupt, because we do not accept what this senator said yesterday. He said, as he wagged his finger, Mexico is to be respected. We are not a protectorate of the United States, nor a colony of the United States. Mexico is free, independent, and a sovereign country.
De una vez fijamos postura. Nosotros no vamos a permitir que intervenga ningún gobierno extranjero, y mucho menos
much less armed forces of a foreign
que
government.
intervengan fuerzas armadas de un gobierno extranjero en nuestro territorio. Y
And starting today, we are
hoy
going to initiate
vamos a
as an
iniciar
information campaign
campaña
aimed
de
at Mexicans
a los mexicanos que viven,
who
trabajan en
live
Estados Unidos
and
y en
work
todos
in the
los
United
estados.
States and all Hispanics in the
Para
United States to inform
informarles
them
lo que estamos
what we
haciendo
are
en
doing in
México.
Mexico
Y cómo
and how this
esta
initiative from the
iniciativa
Republicans,
de los republicanos, además de
besides
irresponsable,
being irresponsible,
es una ofensa
is an offense against the people of Mexico.
al pueblo de México, una falta de respeto a
A
nuestra
lack of our
independencia, a nuestra
independence and our
soberanía.
sovereignty, fam.
Lack of respect.
Y si no
Yeah.
cambian
Sorry,
su
thank you.
actitud y piensan
So AMLO fired back. Now we have a situation. But fam, they went crazy. They went crazy in the media. All the Republicans have been jumping on this. And this is something I kind of pointed out, a couple, almost, I don't want to say it's a year ago, but a while ago when I went to it was an election integrity event in West Palm Beach. And they had this ex-State Department goon who used to work at the border kind of speak. And he was speaking about the invasion into our country. And I was like, why the F are we having this type of speech at an election integrity event? This is whack. Obviously, they wanted to make a point that the illegal immigrants that come in are then kind of wooed and wined and dined to vote Democrat, and they can vote them out. So as many, what they said, illegal immigrants or undocumented workers, they can get in, the more they can, push up the Democratic Party, which I thought was a fairy tale with no backing with it behind it whatsoever. But the thing that drove me crazy is that they were looking to classify the cartels as a foreign combatant. He was talking this whole story about this. And I saw this right away. I was like, holy shit, fam. They're going to use this as an excuse to go into these countries, and they're going to wreak havoc. Sure enough, President Tiny Hands 3 months ago made the whole video, and we will take down the cartels one at a time. And if they do not comply, we will handle business ourselves. Well, here it is, fam, full circle. And they've spent this whole weekend, all the Republicans, all the war hawks, including my favorite guy, Eye Patch McCain over here, going on Fox. He also did, a speech in Spanish as well. Dan Crenshaw, that is, who speaks great Spanish, talking once again, like, why are you getting involved, AMLO? We're trying to do this together. He's trying to make this pitch to the American people that it's the cartel's fault for the problems of overdose in the United States. I've made the point that just like with the opioid crisis in the United States, which was big on Big Pharma, that had a lot to do with what's going on with the fentanyl problem nowadays. Now, there are stats out there people are trying to throw at me that say it's different. They're trying to say that 75% of the people who overdose on fentanyl never were prescribed pain pills from a doctor. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen people say that the first time they ever took an opioid, 75% of the time it came from a doctor's prescription. And there was an overdose of these prescriptions.
That's the truth. It literally comes from a doctor's prescription. Literally. Yeah. I know this because they prescribe opioids to kids and to athletes and to the injured. Like, it's just nothing. Like, it's just literally Tylenol. Okay.
The Adderall too,
so
right?
Easy. Adderall too. I know they try to give my sister a whole bunch of stuff. Like, guys, this is the reality, whether you like it or not. The opioid crisis comes from our own government, from Big Pharma, and if you want to go back further enough, from the fucking CIA. So that's, yeah.
So listen to Eye Patch McCain here, fam. Take a look.
Dan Crenshaw joins me now, the man himself. I can't remember a foreign leader trying to have a direct impact on an American election. I think that's outrageous.
Yeah, that's a foreign election interference. Yeah. So pretty sure it's against the law.
I'm sorry, I got to point out right away before we get started. They're literally trying to seek permission from the United States government to give them the green light to go and interfere in their country. And they're saying, because the president of Mexico says, well, we're gonna give an information campaign and tell people not to vote for them because that's what they're doing to your people back over here. Yeah. And they want to kind of say that this is election interference. Hello, the election integrity activists. I think you should stand up and say something. This is not election interference. Okay? This is not election interference. This is ridiculous that you would allow that to be said.
Impact on an American election. I think that's outrageous.
Yeah, that's a foreign election interference. Yeah. So pretty sure it's against the law, AMLO. Look, AMLO works for the cartels at this point. That seems pretty clear. He's more interested in representing the cartels than the Mexican people. Look, I'm here for the American people and I'm here for the Mexican people. The Mexican people want to get rid of the cartels. The Mexican people don't like that they produce fentanyl, sell it. By the way, they do sell it in their country. Of course, there's drugs in Mexico, just like there's drugs here. It's all produced in Mexico. The precursors come from China. AMLO lets that happen. He lets his cartels operate with impunity, and he gets upset with American politicians like me who actually want to help him.
Dan Crenshaw joins me now, the man himself.
Oh, he just wants to help, fam.
Wants
to help.
They want to help.
Again, when's the last time the U.S. helped, then these countries were better off? First of all, of course there are drugs in Mexico. There's literally drugs everywhere. Literally. Of course there's drugs in Mexico. But to blame it only on the cartels and to use that as the excuse for a military intervention and regime change, because that's exactly what this is about here. And AMLO's on his way out. I mean, he's not going to have too long of a term. He said he's not running for re-election. This is the perfect time to try to push this whole new agenda and control Mexico. Mexico is the closest to the United States, right? It's technically part of North America. And Mexico, of course, has been doing a lot of things, AMLO, that the United States does not like. Nationalizing their lithium, trying to nationalize other industries, has done so many things that the people of Mexico think that, AMLO is part of the cartel. No, the people of Mexico like AMLO. A lot of people like AMLO. You go to Mexico, you will find a lot of support of AMLO. Now, this isn't to say AMLO is perfect or that he's, Daniel Ortega or Che Guevara. He's not, he's not like this revolutionary. I would say he's more of a progressive. but he's definitely not. He's definitely done a lot more in his term than initially what people thought he would as a leftist president. He's definitely had to like walk that line sort of between, you know, not being too radical, to also having to work with the United States, because of course they have to work with the United States. Come on. So I see this as an attack on AMLO. We've been talking about them going after AMLO. We've been talking about them going after Mexico. I've been to Mexico recently. Well, the way it's turned around is phenomenal. The way things have changed for the better there is great. Mexico City, one of the most dangerous places, is not like what it used to be anymore. You can walk around. We were there. You know, it's definitely gotten better. People's lives have improved, but it's definitely got a long way to go in terms of it being a big country, having to deal with the drug problem. It's not easy. And it's not like AMLO represents the entire political spectrum or the entire situation in Mexico. It's not like AMLO isn't fighting his own people, his own, you know, government in itself and the cartels. This isn't just like, you know, like him being like this supreme leader. This is what people need to understand about Latin American politics. It's extremely complicated. There are different groups. It's not just like even a two-party system. There's multiple parties, multiple things at play here. So yeah, it's absolutely infuriating, honestly, to hear him talk that way, as if Mexico is it's something the United States has any jurisdiction over. And that's really what infuriates me the most.
Well, you know, too, also the little slap at China as well. That China's got a part to claim as well. So let's make sure that we get them in there. You know what I'm saying? And the whole thing is that now that fentanyl is being produced here in the United States, right? Because it's a chemical synthetic drug. So multiple parts, multiple substances in it. So you're not going to be able to stop it. Eventually, they're going to pick it up and they're going to do it here in the United States. So we're going to spend all this time going to Mexico, going after cartels while they're going to be producing it here at home. It's ridiculous. Here's Mad Dog. Once again, all the people lining up. You got Barr, you got Pompeo, you got Dan Crenshaw, and Mad Dog Matthias, of course. Here, take a look.
Mexico is a dangerous mess. It's not just the big Gulf Sinaloa cartels. It's also probably 200 armed groups struggling for power, criminal extortion, Mexicans primarily. Homicide rate in Mexico is simply unbelievable. There may be as many as 77,000 Mexicans missing last year. And AMLO, the Mexican president, has had a policy of hugs, not bullets, which is complete nonsense. So our law enforcement, as long as they stay out of the press, there's some reasonably low-level cooperation between Mexican prosecutors and law enforcement in the U.S. But it's been limited, and it's the four border states right now are under State Department avoid travel. 5 of the Mexican states have the same level of danger from the State Department, categorizing them as Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. So it's a huge challenge. Mexico is our #1 trading partner. They're vitally important to the United States, and the border is not being controlled adequately.
You're muted. Joe Biden has the same foreign policy or the same border policy as Donald Trump, essentially.
They're the worst, man. They are the worst. They just are. I mean, holy shit. He said that it's like, and we'll get to Fareed. Donald Trump became president when he dropped a bomb today. Zakaria next. But I mean, this guy just said that Mexico is like Afghanistan, Syria, and all these other countries that are war torn right now and having active bombs being dropped. We were just in Mexico City not too long ago, ladies and gentlemen. It was fine. It was awesome. We were walking around in the streets. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
That's why they don't want you to go. No, really. You're muted again. You keep muting yourself. That's why they don't want you guys to go.
Yeah. It's just ridiculous, guys. This is such a fucking lie. We have psycho war hawks just all within our government, and they'll manufacture consent. People are really buying into this whole thing, and I keep on saying that, well, the CIA runs the cartels. Yeah, but what do you mean, yeah, but? All ISIS, Al Qaeda, all these other groups, they're funded by the United States, so we should be over there. Yeah, but it's the programming that's going on with everybody in our country. Fam, there's a guy down there I just met the other day, a young kid. He's getting ready to go off to Northeastern, go to school. But we had a conversation, me and his father, and, it just amazes me how they are just programmed to okay our foreign policy like this. They'll manufacture consent to go wherever we have to go. That we haven't to talk about China, and he was telling me how China's trying to colonize certain areas. I'm like, we have 400 bases surrounding China over there. Well, yeah, but it's the mentality, and then they'll throw this shit out here. And this is the thing we have to worry about, the neoconservatives, and this is what I'm saying, or the populist right. They will be okay with this war. They will look at it as justified because it's killing Americans, and that's how they're selling it. And they're taking no accountability from the pharmaceutical companies over here that gave people opioids and handed out Adderall like Pez candy. You talked about it earlier. Okay. They're not even mentioning that. They're taking no accountability. And like I said, all these different aspects to make, and this is what we talk about to hell and back, can be eventually obtained here in the United States, and they can just start manufacturing fentanyl here at home. So while we're looking over there, good.
And I was just going to say, and they talk about all the drug problems, all the criminal problems in Mexico. Have you looked in the mirror? Have you seen the United States? What's going on like in the United States? Literally, what are you talking about? All the problems? Like, this is what I don't understand. It's so quick. There's zero accountability for what Big Pharma did. Zero accountability for what the CIA has done. Zero accountability for the fact that your number one customers of these drug products are literally in the United States. Literally. So trust me, there's a bunch of 20-year-olds trying to buy all this stuff that you're blaming Mexicans for. That's the number one, especially in suburban white neighborhoods. Believe me, that's literally where the biggest opioid crisis resides. Suburban, working class or middle class white neighborhoods. That is where this is at. So you want to go, you can't look in the mirror, you can't take some accountability for what's going on. You have to blame Mexico and somehow blame China. Like this is Americans need to really understand your government did everything you're experiencing now is literally the fault of your government. Literally, like everything from the drug problem to the big pharma crisis to the banking industry to all of this stuff that's happening. Everything. It's like, stop looking at the boogeyman in Russians and China and start looking at the people in your own government who are doing this to you and trying to get you to yell at somebody over there so they can manufacture consent for us to go to war, blow people up, and continue to tell you that it's their fault while your life keeps getting worse and worse. And then if that doesn't work, why don't you just blame your neighbor for voting for somebody who's different? Like when that vote doesn't even matter because they select whoever the hell which puppet they want, because the State Department and the military industrial complex and the national security surveillance state literally run the country. The presidents are just a fun football game for you to watch every 4 years and pretend that your vote counts. And so that literally is the gist of it. And it's so infuriating to see so many Americans go along with interventionist policies that obviously they hurt all these people abroad, but they also hurt you. At the end of the day, the only people that benefit are the defense industry. And this country hasn't manufactured anything except weapons. That's it. Weapons. We don't do anything else. We import everything else. It leaves us in a very vulnerable position.
I just can't understand the party of individual responsibility wants to have none of it when it comes to our foreign policy. None of it. The Conservative Party, the movement that's supposed to be about individual responsibility, has zero. None. Zip, zilch, nada when it comes to our foreign policy. The fact that we have so many people migrating to this country, they don't want to take any responsibility for the bases that are down there. The fact that we coup these countries and put in the most radical freaking groups so that they can keep the country unstable. So the dollar is also implemented there through IMF loans. So there's resource extraction. It's ridiculous. And I think people need to take their heads out of their ass and understand what's going on over here, because this is another bullshit right now. We should be pointing the finger at Big Pharma and in this addiction to all these drugs. And I don't want to hear anything different. People are trying to convince me that, no, that's not the case, that the fact that there's just so much of it on the streets. Well, I don't agree with you, because I know for a fact that all these pharmaceuticals, I used to work in the restaurant industry, in the catering business, and I used to feed pharmaceutical reps and doctors' offices. They were pushing these drugs left and right. They had an open budget to do it, and doctors started handing out these drugs like it was Pez candy. Not to say that some people don't need it, opioids. We have a friend of the show. We love her and stuff. She's got to take opioids because she gets these crazy migraine headaches. But for so many people, they gave these particular drugs to, and then when they couldn't get any more of them, they pulled the leash. They had to go out in the streets and try to find them. And that's what's happening right now. And it's not Mexico's or China's fault. It's the United States' fault. It's a homegrown fault. Take a look at Fareed. Donald Trump became president the day he dropped the bomb. Zakaria.
Here's my take. Mexico could be entering a golden age. It's perfectly placed to benefit from the growing tensions between the United States and China. Parts of the country are already seeing a boom as companies diversify away from China and invest in Mexico. In fact, a good chunk of that investment is being made by Chinese companies that are finding a way to continue to sell goods to the United States. The state of Nuevo León, where much of the country's advanced manufacturing is centered, has received almost $7 billion in investment since late 2021, and its governor expects Tesla's recently announced plan to build a gigafactory there to yield $10 billion over time. Laredo, Texas, which deals almost exclusively with Mexican trade, last October beat out Los Angeles as the United States' busiest port. But these promising economic wins are being stifled by bad politics. For the last 3 decades, Mexico has had a run of presidents who, while they have had their flaws, were serious about policy and tried to modernize the country, albeit with varying degrees of success. Alas, that luck has run out. Mexico's president since 2018, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known as AMLO, is a populist demagogue who recalls the strongman tradition in Latin American history. AMLO's COVID policies were a disaster. Mexico has had one of the highest COVID case fatality ratios in the world. His economic policies have been anti-growth. By one estimate, nearly 4 million Mexicans have slipped into poverty since 2019. He has failed to take on the drug cartels, and he has attacked Mexican political institutions, many of which have acquired legitimacy and competence only recently. His current effort might be the most dangerous. For most of the 20th century, Mexico was a one-party state with fraudulent elections ensuring that the ruling party always won. That changed in 2000, when President Ernesto Zedillo's electoral reforms enabled the country's first free and fair election, which the ruling party lost. Out of the same spirit of democratization came the National Election Agency, the INE, which has developed a reputation for being independent and competent. Last month, AMLO's party passed a bill to drastically weaken that agency. AMLO had initially pushed a plan that would have killed the INE altogether and replaced it with a new body, but he couldn't clear the bar to pass a constitutional amendment, so he has settled for legislation that hollows it out. Its budget will be cut by nearly a third. Many local offices will be closed. 6,000 staff members will be laid off. Its powers will be curtailed, taking some teeth out of the watchdog. He says he is doing it to improve the voting process and save tens of millions of dollars a year. Now, AMLO cannot legally run for a second term as president. He's taking these steps to ensure that the next elections result in a victory for his party, which he plans to continue to dominate. The Supreme Court is expected to hear challenges to the president's gutting of the agency in the near future. The election agency has not been perfect, but it is a pillar of Mexico's fledgling democracy. Polls show it is the most trusted institution in Mexico after the armed forces. AMLO's attacks on it have been part of his assault on several NGOs and independent government agencies, from those dealing with corruption to human rights. In her excellent article, Shannon O'Neill writes that AMLO has raided the coffers of public funds for artists and academics, weaponized the judiciary, and routinely attacked those who criticize him. AMLO's entire term in office has been out of a Peronist textbook, claimed to speak for the poor, attack the elites, and meanwhile run a shoddy, incompetent government. When a journalist reported on the lavish life the president's son lived in the United States, he released the journalist's alleged personal income information, which the Mexican Bar Association said violated the Constitution and the tax code. AMLO campaigned on a promise to fight corruption, But according to the NGO Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity, his government awards 3 out of 4 contracts using a no-bid system that does not even ask for competing offers. Mexico's biggest problem is not an economic one, but rather a political one. The state has lost its capacity to rein in the drug cartels, which run large parts of the country. AMLO campaigned on the slogan of hugs, not bullets. But in office, he simply ceded the issue to the military, which is deeply riddled with corruption and drug money. In 2020, the United States apprehended a former defense minister on charges of being in league with the cartels. The government of Mexico asked the U.S. to drop the charges, and Washington agreed. Former U.S. Attorney General William Barr recently described AMLO as the cartel's chief enabler. AMLO's attack on the election agency is essentially personal. He believes that he won the 2006 and 2012 elections, but was denied his due. Independent observers do not agree. In fact, much of his presidency is an act of narcissism. He holds daily press conferences that can go on for hours. He attacks the state because its agencies limit his powers. And now he appears to be weakening election oversight. They have their differences, of course, but AMLO has turned out to be the Mexican Donald Trump.
Fam, we should
The
have stopped it
Mexican-
like several times because it was
Yeah,
so much
but I
upset.
wanted to get to the Mexican Donald Trump, right? Like, oh
This-
my God. And then he's like saying, oh, he claims these elections, those elections were sour. And this NGO is trying to come in and mimic a lot of what the OAS was trying to do.
The
Fareed Zakaria
Mexicans
has
against
know what he's doing. Yeah, go ahead.
the Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity is an NGO that's funded by the United States. Literally, it's an NGO that's funded by the United States. This is, again, the United States using the cover of human rights and democracy and bullshit via their freaking State Department funded NGOs. It's literally an NGO. He already spoke out against it. You know what he said? He said this NGO is the United States trying to interfere in the affairs of Mexico using this NGO. And he's called them coup plotters because that's literally what they're there to do. So all these statistics that he's spewing out there are literally statistics from an NGO funded by the U.S. State Department in order to get rid of somebody like AMLO, who, unlike his 5-minute piece of bullshit report, is literally doing what the people of Mexico want. He's securing Mexico's assets for Mexico rather than to be exploited like it is right now in Peru for the outside world and not for the people of the country. This is why, again, that when Castillo was couped, that was largely the threat, is like the lithium, like getting a hold of that lithium, getting a hold of the country's resources. And so, of course, they say, oh, he's a Donald Trump. And of course, Pasta, they did mention the COVID policies. Literally, one of the best places to be during COVID was Mexico because they weren't stupid enough to shut down the entire government because their country could not function and it would have sunk the economy. And they looked at the information, and AMLO did as was needed, just like Nicaragua did for all the leftists that love the COVID lockdown bullshit. Yeah, Nicaragua, the socialist country, literally had some of the most anti-lockdown policies during COVID, and so did Mexico with the leftist president. So there you go. Of course they're going to call him Donald Trump. They're going to try to frame this like he's some sort of, when actually they're yelling at him because he's actually doing things like nationalizing the lithium. So they're using the excuse of the cartels to go after him because they know actually he's actually very well supported by a lot of people. We've met people from Mexico many times on our trips in Latin America, and they're extremely supportive of AMLO.
By the way, Lindsey Graham right here. Graham says he will introduce a bill to set the stage for the U.S. to use military force in Mexico, fam. Of course, Mr. Lindsey Graham, Warb Hawk, he had to get in there. I love what Free Assange hashtag Hands Off Cuba said. This is the hypocrisy of the United States empire has no limits, fam. That would be a military intervention in a sovereign country. Also, the CIA and the DEA are the cartel's capos. Thank you very much. The real reason behind it is that AMLO nationalized the lithium. And there it is.
There it is.
Mexico nationalizes lithium and populist president's push to extend state control. They don't want that. They want to make sure that they can get their person in there. That's why they're pushing their NGO that Fareed Zakaria is standing behind. Fareed, why don't you just stand behind the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, or the OAS, or USAID? It's the same shit. You know what I mean?
He
This is
already
a
does,
United
huh?
States, United States NGO trying to say what goes on in Mexico. And there's a lot of evidence as election integrity activists. I can tell you this much because I looked into those past elections where AMLO got screwed. AMLO got cheated. And that's why, and once again, this was very much like a Colombia situation. What they did is the citizens were aware of how the elections were run, and they kept on hacking at the rules, election by election by election, until they got a system which can merit actual fair results. And that's what happened. And that's why AMLO got in office. That's why Gustavo Petro got in office and stuff in Colombia, whether you like him or not. So, yeah, that is what's going on. Fam, we've been talking about this for quite some time, and we said they're going to use this as an excuse to intervene, and they look like they're getting ready to do it. It's not that we have a crystal ball, is that they'll tell us what they're doing it. It's just so odd that I caught it at an election integrity event in West Palm Beach. For the first time, somebody floated the idea, and here we are, 6-8 months later. I think it's like 8 months later. They're trying to list the cartels as an enemy, foreign combatant, which this is what Lindsey Graham's going to draft up. It will give the United States military permission to go into Mexico anytime they want. So what are they going to do? They're going to essentially remove that fucking government.
It's hilarious that the United States drafts some resolution to give them permission to go into Mexico anytime they want, as if their stupid little resolution has any significance to the people of Mexico or to the people of any country, that they have, rationalized themselves into thinking they have the right of interfering because they can't deal with our own shit that we created. That's the reality it is. It's really infuriating how we continue to intervene and how people, choose to look the other way if it's a country that they really don't like or that they have been vilified against, whether it's China for conservatives or countries in Latin America for conservatives or Russia for the liberals or whatever it is for both, China for both, essentially, or the Middle East for both, right? It doesn't matter. They'll justify one country over the other. You'll see the same people voting against money for Ukraine, voting to go in literally with militaries into Mexico, because that's just the system we have. That's why this just doesn't work. And the last thing, since we're talking about coup plotters, fam, I did add one last tweet. I just want to mention, it's been a long time since I've watched the Oscars. And it's been a long time since I've been paying attention. But this really boiled my blood when I saw it. And, being here in Moscow, and also even before I got to Moscow, we knew who Alex Navalny was. He's actually like an actual racist, by the way, like pretty close to being a Nazi, the dude. But he's like the Juan Guaido of Russia, right? So Navalny won Best Documentary at the Oscars. And I said, not that the Oscars wasn't dead already, but giving a State Department fictional narrative propaganda film an award for Best Documentary for highlighting the racist coup plotting wannabe Juan Guaido of Russia pretty much throws the statue in the landfill for good. Literally. Navalny is a propaganda film. It's not a documentary film. Navalny is nobody important in Russia. Literally. He's literally the Juan Guaido of Russia. And not only that, he has said some disgusting things about people, about groups of people, about people in the Middle East, about people in Georgia. He called Georgians rodents. I mean, he has done a lot of things, but he is not this guy that they're making him out to be. Pasta, and if I don't know if my family has HBO, so it was showing there, and it's like this picture of him looking like some sort of like, look at this guy Navalny, let's do a whole thing on him. It's disgusting. This is propaganda, and the Oscars just literally just, not that it wasn't already on the shit list, it's just gone now. It's not a documentary film, correct me if I'm wrong, is supposed to be nonfiction. It's supposed to be nonfiction, guys. It's not supposed to be fucking fiction here. Like, not even the right category.
And I think the fact that there's such a lack of support for this guy, and what you talked about, he's the Juan Guaido of Russia. You know what I'm saying? And it's just crazy that they're still trying to prop him up. But you got to say, fam, you got to give him some props for being consistent. No matter how much they fail, they're still trying to make their bullshit stories stick. You know, and now throwing it at the Oscars and seeing people all, the dude who read who opened up the envelope, oh boy, like it was something big, Navalny, when he won. I was like, oh, shut the fuck up, dude. Just, you guys know nothing, man. Nothing. There's literally videos of this dude calling fucking people within the region cockroaches, humans, cockroaches, saying that's we have to get rid of them, exterminate them. Like he's a racist piece of shit that has no fucking credibility. He's known by nobody, and they're trying to blow him up. And idiots like Bernie Sanders, it's no question that Navalny has been under things, and we need to make sure that he gets whatever, and blah, 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 and can see his doctors.
But fam, if we give medals to Nazis, I guess this is a little bit better than that. I don't know.
But fam, he's not in jail because Putin put him in jail for anything. He's in jail for fraud that he committed with a French company. Right? I mean, and then he was showing like his followers throwing the whatchamacallit, the Sing Heil and all that bullshit. It's just disgusting. I try to get away the whole day without talking about this fucking asshole, but you know, and then they start talking about, you know, the director and shit who's got no following whatsoever, and they're trying to highlight him. What is he going to do next, that dummy? So,
I can't.
anyways.
I cannot with this guy. Oh my God. I hate Juan Guaidos of the world. You know? If you ever do anything in your life and you feel like your life has no meaning, just don't be Juan Guaido of the world. That's all I ask.
Don't be a Guaido. Don't be a Guaido. And all right, so here we go. And just so we know, we have some Super Ray contributions. Thank you for those who have followed over on the Super Rays, the Rockfin. If you have a couple extra bucks, it's $14.99 a month. We're still waiting for the individual subscription, but for $14.99 a month, you get our premium content, which is on right now, and everybody else's premium content across the board. It really does help out if you can get a subscription and watch over at Rockfin. You can always keep a tab open and talk to Vicky Ling and Jerry Alatalo and all the other cool people that are over there on Rumble if you want to do that over there. And of course, we're on YouTube today. We didn't have to get off because we weren't talking about one of the three topics that will get you fired or cut down. Alvin Johnson, thank you for the Super Ray contribution. It is always appreciated on the couch. Alvin Johnson, you're great. Chris Leone, Mexico has applied to join BRICS. What's up, Chris Leone? We love you. Do you guys think they will intervene now that this has happened? Also, the Mexican peso is doing great. People are calling it the super peso, fam. I need to get me some super.
Mexico is doing far better. Everything he said was a lie. Everything, whatever the hell his name is, Fazir, said is an entire just lie. I could not stand like watching those 5 minutes of my life waste away. I mean, Jesus Christ.
All right. That's it for today, guys. We'll see you Wednesday. We'll be back Wednesday, same time, same bat channel. Fam, make sure you know that the United States Americans, they mess with their clocks again, and we sprung forward yesterday. So now it is 1:41 on the West Coast, 4:41 here on the East Coast. What time is it in Moscow? Let me guess. Hold on.
Oh.
Hold on. Let me guess. 11:41.
Yeah.
Woo!
So now you're 7 hours behind.
Yeah, 7 hours behind. You're 7 hours ahead, fam. We're 7 hours behind. And we love you too, Fred. Of course.
The West is behind. We know this. All right. All right, guys. Have a good night. Thanks for watching.
Bye. We'll see you guys soon.
I'll be on
love
RT
in
a few hours.
Thank you guys so much for helping the show out, making it happen. We can't do it without you.
Thank you, guys.